Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Levecka, Vice President of Sales here at CareWorks Corporation. Hope you're doing well. I just want to welcome everybody from the East Coast and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. We have quite a few people that are going to be joining us on the line today. So our first part of our ITSM strategy, part 1 of 3. So we just want to welcome you all and thank you very much for joining us. I know that lots of companies and all of you have lots going on during the day and to join us. And I just want to say thank you very much for that. Also want to say thank you for Jason Murphy for joining me this afternoon. Jason is one of our senior sales engineers on our ITSM strategy. So Jason, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you, Marco.
Great. And as I mentioned before, I'm Mark Levecka. So before we kind of get into this, thought I'd take about 5 seconds and explain who CareWorks is if you're not familiar with us. That we've been around for over 30 years providing IT service management solutions to the mid-market organizations right across the world. We strategize on enterprise-level service desk. We manage over and look after over 1 million end users currently right now. Hundreds of thousands of tickets on a yearly basis that we kind of take a look after. And we're a really kind of strategic company for organizations in the mid-market. We're going to talk about IT service management and really kind of what's transpiring in the marketplace today with Jason. It's a core piece of what we do where we standardize on ServiceNow. We do 24/7 enterprise service management and support desk as well for companies. Anywhere organizations that are ranging from 250 employees to we have one of our largest companies that has over 100,000 employees that we look after. Co-managed services where we actually will go in and support IT departments in terms of how they function and what they want to deliver services on. And we also do hardware and software. So really kind of quick information for everybody. But Jason, we're going to talk a little bit about this this afternoon and try and bring some value to everybody that's joining us. One of the biggest things that I tend to see, and I'm sure you do as well as we kind of get into some of the markets, some of the clients that we're talking to, is especially in the mid-market, we see organizations that are what we call kind of traditional type of reactive business models, reactive IT departments. And as we kind of take a look at that, we really want to try and help organizations get their business to the next level. And we'll talk about that in terms of what it means from a strategy standpoint, but making sure that organizations, if they're not delivering proactive services internally, leveraging, for instance, automation and management tools and technologies can cause a lot of frustration. So as businesses kind of transform and as they start incorporating cloud-based solutions, we even have we're bringing cloud stores, and what we mean by cloud stores is it's really kind of like an IT storefront for organizations to basically pick and choose and standardize on the hardware and software packages that they're bringing to market. When we kind of have we have our own strategy in terms of what businesses should look like, but we're not seeing that, right? And Jason, why don't you kind of explain to us when you're dealing with IT departments, what do you tend to see when we refer to it as the old work model?
Sure. And just to kind of outline kind of my experience around ITSM and obviously managed services is kind of where I've come from, is that I've worked with several IT departments. I'm a former systems administrator as well. I've done help desk and ITSM implementations for various companies over the years. And a common theme that I see with a lot of IT departments is, one, sometimes they don't know what they don't know, right? So what are kind of the latest and greatest tool sets that can obviously make their lives easier or improve the lives of the people around them. And the other one is that when you're in that traditional model, as you had up earlier, it's one of those things where you're just reacting all of the time. That's your job day in, day out. So what you'll find is that you're always, as any kind of systems administrator or technician, is that you're just trying to keep your head above water. But at some point, you have to start looking at better ways of doing things, and that's really what this this webinar is about. It's about kind of outlining what ITSM is and kind of where it's evolving.
Sure. And I think like one of the things that I tend to see is a lot of the times we'll see organizations where they have, disproportionate, we can even refer to them as silos, right? Where you have maybe somebody that's handling, for instance, the automation piece of the business that's not talking to the ITSM team, or for instance, the service desk is really kind of struggling in terms of how they deliver services to their customers. And when we talk about modernizing businesses, I think that organizations and businesses really need to have some sort of a foundation in terms of really kind of, it's like, building a home. You're going to have your blueprint, you're going to build your foundation, and then from there, you're going to have to really kind of, incorporate what are the different tools and facets and technologies. And I think, IT departments and really kind of people that run those departments have to kind of look at it the same. And we tend to see, we run into it as that's not necessarily the case, right? And we see that, for instance, some organizations, they're running the service desk, but for instance, there's no automation or monitoring being done. Or for instance, they might be just leveraging a ticketing tool, but they don't have a full suite of an ITSM. And so the efficiencies and what they're gaining from how they operate, they're struggling. And we tend to really kind of see that from people that we work with, right?
Right, and especially I see that a lot in a lot of our co-managed services. There's large IT departments that we work with that are still stuck in that kind of traditional model where they have a network guy, or they have a LAN guy, or a desktop guy, or girl. But the important part here is that it's about transforming those resources into service delivery, and that's really what IT service management is about. As you can see or read on your screen, the core concept behind IT service management is as such, IT delivered as a service, right? IT service management, ITSM, or for short, refers to the entirety of activities directed by policies, organized and structured in processes and supporting procedures that are performed by an organization, and this is the important part, to plan, design, deliver, operate, and control the IT services offered to customers. Now, when I say customers, that can really be anyone that's either internal or even external customers as well.
And when we look at enterprise service management, what are we incorporating, right? Because it's evolved, right? Like when you take a look at people refer to, ITSM, we hear that kind of the terminology kind of thrown out there all the time. And then, as we go in and we take a look at these businesses, they might only be doing incident management and they're calling it ITSM, which we know that's not the case. Or for instance, they're struggling on delivering, problem management or change management and don't necessarily have that one-stop place where they're delivering all of those services, or they don't necessarily the know-how. So how does that all kind of fit into these businesses?
Sure. And when you start looking at enterprise service management, and again, it's one of those, foreboding terms, the enterprise, because you're thinking something like the Coca-Colas or the General Motors or, very large, corporations. But service management is really about encompassing not only, ITSM, your kind of your core competency in terms of your IT strategy, but the other things that you want to incorporate as well. Things like human resources, facilities, sales, finance, encompassing your business body within your technology. And that's really historically why there's some confusion around ITSM, because anything that is kind of software based that the IT department is really using is referred to as an ITSM tool. Now, when we start looking at our tool suite, for example, ServiceNow, it's one of those things that it's much more than that, because what you're able to do is not only encompass ITSM, but also things like automation, the building of apps, right? The integrations that you can easily build right through ServiceNow to query via REST or API. I won't get too technical, but it's one of those things where you're able to do those things in a very low code or it's very much a Java development lifecycle. So it's one of those things where enterprise service management is really just to read off the screen here, is to describe the use of service processes and technologies across the organization. It's for everybody. It is meant to be a broader term like ERP or EAM, for example, is Enterprise Asset Management Tool, in contrast to the IT Service Management Tool, right, which only concerns the management of IT services. So ServiceNow is really about everything, right, taking it across the entire company, right?
And then how does ITIL fit into this? And I know you're going to touch base on that, but does the new service management suite of products really still incorporate ITIL, or is it basically kind of standardized on that?
Well, it's funny because in terms of how tools are built, it's always, what drives the tool? And usually it's customers or what's flashy. I come from a software background, as you do yourself, and it's really about what is going to dictate the kind of the sales of your tool. What's the latest and greatest widget or what have you. When it comes to true ITSM, it has to be grounded in ITIL, right? So that is the framework which kind of governs how the tool should be built. Now, it's one of those things where I do talk about that, what is the difference between ITSM and what is ITIL? They do interchange, or they should, like they do within our Grand Central offering. But the other part here is ITIL is IT service management, but not all IT service management is ITIL, right? So
it's interesting.
Right. So you need to have the framework that is locked into your IT service management so that your departments are designed and working in the proper workflow.
Okay, cool.
Now, a couple things I kind of wanted to kind of describe as we're doing a kind of ITSM 101 is really talking about IT service management and describing who is this supposed to benefit, right? Now, historically, or at least from my perspective, it's always been about the IT department needing a tool to kind of encompass all of the alerting or all of the requests that are coming in from various departments. It's kind of it collates all of the problem, right, within the organization, or at least the incidents. But ITSM, at least now, is more about improving things like business operations and making the lives of the rest of the employees better.
So you raise a good point there, because you see all the different solutions that are out there, and as businesses and IT departments try to modernize themselves, right, a lot of the times they're taking a look at how can we improve processes, how can we make our lives better. But what we don't hear enough about is, how do I make the end user, how do I make a much better user experience, right? And maybe we could touch base on that in terms of what that means and how do we address that, and why really is it important for organizations to really kind of focus on their employees and have a better user experience.
Right, because in terms of just the organization itself, the people that are listening on the call, your business, you have to think about all of the different departments and all of the different needs that go on within your organization. Can you imagine a scenario where no one is really complaining about the tools that they are using, or every employee has a way to do something better? The good news is that within something like ServiceNow, you're able to do those things because you can redesign workflow and through integrations, for example, and pull it all together. So the end user experience then goes much, much higher. And if you start looking and polling internally to your own organizations, I think you will find that everyone is still very siloed. Finance is using their own applications. That's their own department. Sales, for example, finance, the list goes on and on. HR, facilities. It's one of those things that you have departments, and then at the top level, the managers start meeting and collaborating. That is now changing, right? So what it's supposed to do is when you have designed your ITSM tool, for example, in our Grand Central product, what we have is a way for the entire company to do things like design, create, deliver, IT will support and manage those IT services, right? And that is really what it's about. It's all built out, and the stakeholder or the controller is really the IT department, because obviously they're the tech savvy people. However, it's meant for everyone else.
And as we look at this, is it today's generation of people, they're looking for instant gratification from support tickets. They want to know if they just, like, if they have an issue, they really want it resolved quickly, right? And we joke about it internally, and we get it. We understand a lot of businesses still operate this way, but submitting basically a support ticket through your email is kind of like something that maybe happened and you should have been doing 5 or 10 years ago, but solutions and evolution, like naturally, like across a lot of technologies that are out there, has changed that, right? And so maybe we can kind of touch base on, like, when we take a look at our instance of ServiceNow that we provide to organizations. What are those types of things that an end user can do? Is it, like, for instance, do they have access to knowledge bases? Do they get that instant gratification? And what is typically the benefits, the ROIs that organizations see?
So in this discussion that you're bringing up is really twofold. You brought up email, and then you brought up in what I find the most kind of next gen about ITSM today is really kind of self-service, right? Knowledge base being part of self-service. So when you start looking at incident management, and you can see on the screen the various levels of some defined ITSM processes within any kind of tool, problem management, service level management, change management. But the important part here is any ticketing tool can parse an email for a keyword. And then what happens next is basically it has to go into a bucket, right? The unfortunate part is that end users are keeping their descriptions fairly short. You can't really triage by email as well as you can by really having someone come into the tool in a much more kind of a friendly way and really triaging themselves. So the first thing we try to coach people to do is internally change the process. This isn't, you might be looking at this right now in terms of changing your own IT process, but this is a strategy that needs to be, what's the right word I'm looking for, set up across the entire organization. Everyone needs to be able to do all of these different things. Now, one of the things I when I was talking about, something like, email, is that you brought up, obviously, the end user experience. And one of the reasons that people even start looking at ITSM is because from an operational point of view, there are usually frustrations around end user experience, either from a customer level, right, or an internal level, right? Someone in finance, finds the ticketing tool, really unfriendly, and the response time takes too long, and various other complaints that IT departments field from time to time.
And to your point, right, it's both external and internal, right? Like, you want your staff to be happy, instant gratification on what they have issues with, but also in terms of you're delivering support to your end user customers, right? Everybody has customers, and how do they engage with you? And what does that look like in terms of how they're working with you?
And that's the exact point, is that, sure, from an outward in point of view, we need to make our customers happy. But most importantly, if the internal staff is finding things cumbersome, they're not going to make your customers happy, right? So you have to look at this from both dimensions, right? And I chose this slide in particular because it really shows, in my opinion, where we're at today, right? In 2017, it's about improving the end user experience, 20%. Now I could go on and on in terms of reading out, the various other percentages. There's reasons why IT wants to, find the latest and greatest next gen tool, but it really starts with changing how the internal organization is really focused and running. Okay. Now, one thing I did want to do is talk briefly about my own experience with ITSM. Many years ago, going back to the year 2000. I worked as a help desk technician. That's how I kind of started out. I think that's pretty much how most, I should say, most IT people start out, they kind of, elevate or gravitate to the top over many years.
Question for you on that though.
Sure.
So what kind of tools did you guys use?
I used a tool called Desk Pro. I used, the one I'm going to talk about today is HP OpenView is probably the main one. I've used Remedy because I used to work for a global outsourcer. I won't give their name, but they're the largest in North America, where they did call center services. So I've used many ITSM tools or ticketing tools.
Were they disproportionate tools? Were they tools that really didn't kind of integrate with one another, or
if there was an integration, it was to someone else's back office, right? So they could export and pull information in, so they could do billing or various ways to bill their customers or what have you. But from a IT delivery side, either very slow, very cumbersome. End user experience was absolutely brutal. And the one example I'm going to give is that when I worked for the federal government for a short time as a contractor, it was one of those things where they did an implementation of HP OpenView. HP OpenView, going back to, I think when I worked for the feds, it was probably around 2007. It was one of those things where, I was triaging a lot of incidents that were coming in from various departments within the government, and, I was trying to fix their issues. And I found most of my labor was more in the administration of the ticketing, right? And that is and that is how a lot of those mid-market companies that we deal with are still doing business today, right? Very siloed, even within their own IT organization. Whereas right now, because of self-service, letting end users engage IT in a more proactive manner, right? And that's really kind of the historical method, is that we're still kind of stuck in 2007 when it comes to kind of IT best practice.
Makes a lot of sense.
Now, this is really where I wanted to talk about the kind of the benefits or the reasons of adoption for ITSM today, right? Now, the first one is what we keep talking about is the end user experience, and it's really about the consumerization of how people do their own shopping online today. I call it the Amazon effect, as you can see at the very bottom. But it's really about how everyone hops online and does business online, how people shopped. It's really about what employees expect. A prime example I like to give is how people have introduced MacBooks into the workplace. I come from a time when there was never a Mac. The employer would never buy you a Mac. Nobody used Mac in the workplace. But university students, at least historically, maybe going back 5-10 years, started buying Macs. They were flashy, they were easy to use. It was the iPhone of the laptop. So it was one of those things where when they started migrating into the workforce, they were like, I can't use this. I can't use a PC. I need my Mac. And that's the consumerization. They know how to do what they know based on how they know it, right? And as an organization, we need to give them the tools and the structure to be able to service themselves, right? Or work within the organization that in the most proactive manner. The other benefit of adoption of ITSM is really the business demand. Okay, so demand capabilities from other departments, right? So even internally, we have many departments here, from a help desk to finance to sales. And it's one of those things where when you're using either ITSM or an enterprise service management tool, it has always been seen as a way to improve the operational efficiency. Okay. Now, it's one of those things where, my example here, HR, for example, typically, and maybe still is today, needs to ask IT for information. Does this person still have access, for example? Do I have to log a ticket? Whereas using something like ServiceNow, that can be a more of a collaborative approach based on approvals and the chaining of workflow. So instead of requests, in terms of a push and pull, HR can really pull their own, right, with the proper integrations, the proper automation. And that's really where, that's why ServiceNow is kind of the cutting edge, leading edge, or I should say bleeding edge technology. Even though they've been around for many, many years, they're almost like the best kept secret. And the reason being is that because of that enterprise service management model, they were something that historically were at the Coca-Colas, right, the General Motors. That trickle down has now come down to the mid-market.
Yeah, and I think what we tend to see is that these solutions and the technologies that are around nowadays are allowing small mid-market companies to big mid-market companies to act like an enterprise, right? And behave and have the workflows, the processes, the systems in place, just like the big companies do, which there's no doubt at the end of the day really helps them kind of focus on their business, but also helps them do what they really need to do, whether they're in manufacturing or whether they're in sales or whatever the case may be, and do things properly. So it's really interesting to see how these solutions and technologies really kind of impact companies.
Right, and it's one of those things where businesses, they grow organically from ground up, right? Kind of like a flower, right? It's one of those things where there are tools internally that you'll never get away from. ITSM should not be one of those. It's one of those things that you do not have to be stuck in an ITSM tool. There's ways to export information, import information. A lot of times IT departments feel like they're kind of handcuffed to their solution. And that's no longer the case. There's tools available that allow us to pull everything kind of in, right? But the best part about is that if finance is hooked to a Sage platform, QuickBooks, whatever it might be, there's integrations that are easily codable. I can almost code these integrations, and I have very little. Well, at least these days, I have very little coding experience, so I can do a kind of a low code model and kind of point and click through the integration. Now, the important part here is there are capabilities from self-service, service catalogs. That's the kind of drop down in the ticketing solution where if you go into network, you can put firewall or switch or what have you. That's the service catalog. And it's all about the flow from that service catalog for not only your internal staff, but your external customer as well. Your knowledge bases are built in, right? Externally and internally. And obviously things like chat, mobile apps, so that you have what we call the social, right? And this is the Facebook era, right? You have to have many different methods for your employees, for your customers to be able to work with you.
I think it's really interesting because as we see as businesses get younger, right? As you mentioned before, the kids coming out of university and they're just they're wired a little bit differently. How they process and how they want things, right, and how they want to work. And so these tools and solutions that I find they really map well to organizations that are looking to kind of change to we say modernize, or whether it's become younger and evolve with change. And when we talk about self-serve, right, it goes back to my point before where they need instant gratification and they want to know exactly what's going on. And we have a lot of our own customers as well where they'll try and solve the problem themselves, right? Instead of calling support, right, or opening up a ticket or chatting with anybody, they'll go into the knowledge base, right, and see exactly how can they deal with it themselves. And so having that information at the fingertips of employees, I think kind of really as a whole impacts that instant gratification and how businesses kind of need to operate.
Right. And again, the main point of what I'm really trying to display to at least the people that are on the call is that this isn't help desk anymore, right? This is about empowerment. And I'm not going to go off on a huge tangent here, but it's all about the top line here: improved efficiency and reduced operational cost, right? Self-service and workload reductions. Those two key points right there is why I put them at the top. There's a lot of improvements for using something like Grand Central. Obviously we can talk more about that as we do our second and third call. But really from an operational point of view of any business, right, using something like our tool Grand Central to really change how they do business in a positive approach. There are no drawbacks. When you start looking at the integrations, when you start building your own applications using this tool, the benefit's there.
And to your point on the help desk, right? Like, as they incorporate a solution like this, it seems to me that, or what we tend to see is that a lot of these organizations, if you take an IT department as an example, that's embedded in utilizing this tool on a daily basis, they can start allocating resources to do different types of things, right? And we tend to see that organizations at some point in time, especially when they come and talk to us, service desk is that kind of that one pain point that businesses want to change, right? It's something that they struggle with. It's how they deliver services, and nobody really kind of likes dealing with it, right? Whereas you incorporate the right type of ITSM tool, it drives that efficiencies and really kind of hits the bottom line in terms from an ROI standpoint. Organizations can reappropriate, for instance, level 1 engineers and techs and get them to do other things in projects and really kind of drive the business forward. And then, for instance, organizations like CareWorks that come in and handle, those top 5 questions that businesses kind of get asked every day that, it doesn't make sense for them to really kind of have employees doing that.
Right. And I'm sure based on the people we have on the call, if you were to ask any kind of CTO or IT director how their IT staff are doing business, I think that most would probably say that they're overloaded. That is always, they're always running at 100%. It's one of those things where the only other alternative is adding more resources. And when I talk about things like ServiceNow or what I should say is our Grand Central, is that there is a cost of doing nothing, right? And it costs more and more. Now there's things like cloud and what we call the digital transformation, using things like agile best practices, or what my favorite one is DevOps. But it's the investment in ITSM so that the business can invest in other areas, right? Other than ramping up the IT staff.
Sure.
Right, and it takes away from the growth of the business, really, right? Because if you had the proper processes developed, again, organically, you can grow much more faster, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, and when I was, and it's perfect timing, is that when you start looking at IT headcount, right? Like you've got 5 staff, right? You've got a few sysadmins, maybe a network guy, and the IT director. It's one of those things where as the business growth goes up, well, then so does the IT complexity, right? Because of the digital transformation, because of how the business is growing, right? Because of cloud, right? There are projects to do, right? And the only alternative that you have right now, using that kind of siloed method that we were describing earlier, is to add, more people.
Which doesn't always make sense.
Right.
Or you just can't get the head count for it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, when we're talking about bleeding edge, or if we're talking about kind of what's happening with ITSM now, and I mentioned social earlier, and this might have, you could even rebrand this as maybe the millennial effect, is one of the things that people are taking a more a collaborative approach to the workplace. That's where lean, agile, and DevOps come in, right? Because I can tell you this is how Google does business, right? This is how they develop, across all facets of their organization, from finance to HR to all of it. This is something that is trickling down now into medium-sized businesses, or large-size mid-market, where you can come in here and really pick and choose the best approaches to your staff, right? How are they going to collaborate? Do you give them a 2-week project? Do they feel invested, right? It's about tying all of those facets of your organization together so they can really find the proper processes and workflow to get the job done, right, in the most efficient manner. And that's really where, again, my key here is DevOps. That's really kind of ITSM 2.0, right? Where there's proper workflows in place so that people at the very bottom, you can see there, where it's experiment and learn, where they can drive new business by simply creating new technology.
Interesting. So to kind of touch base really quickly as we kind of wrap up here, and hopefully everybody's gotten some good information, and we'll address some questions that we may have. But I'm sure that there's a lot of organizations and companies that are out there that have said, hey, listen, we need to make the change in our business. We have to incorporate, whether it's an ITSM platform, or we have to make that change. And either we can't do it, we don't have the people, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the know-how, complicated.
Or the time.
Right, or the time, right? And so what I wanted to show to everybody, and Jason mentioned a few times, so yes, we as a business, we've standardized on ServiceNow in terms of the technology of choice that we wanted to bring to market. And for anybody that's familiar with ServiceNow, while it's the best solution that's out there, there's also, for instance, a massive project plan that needs to be incorporated into it, and really kind of really a professional services engagement in terms of us working with the companies that we want to bring the solution to. But for other companies, for instance, that, hey, listen, would love the power of ServiceNow, but don't necessarily have the time, the energy, maybe even the dollars to kind of roll it out. You referred to Grand Central a couple of times, and how's that a game changer in the marketplace?
Well, it kind of circles back to some of my first slides. What is ITIL? What is help desk? That's something that happened many, many years ago. Our instance of Grand Central is built out in such a way that allows kind of any mid-market, whether it's IT department or either other aspects of your departments, to hop into this tool to really get the most out of their business. And when you start looking at the different technologies that are surrounding the ITSM tool, you can start going, wow, I can start integrating my finance application and getting information from that. And that's really the beauty of something like our Grand Central product. It's already built out. All of the ITIL best practices is already formulated. Now, some people find it almost like a handcuff, right? Like you can't change things. Now we can work with you on those changes, but we've designed this in such a way that it has the proper ITIL best practice already built in, so we can work together on some of those changes.
So it sounds like it's ServiceNow as a service. What am I referring? Like, is it kind of like Office 365, a cloud-based operation? Do I have anything to do with it, or
sure. I mean, it's one of those things where there's rebrandability. You're going to be able to get in there and really show your end users what your front end is going to look like. That's obviously the UI that they would see, your customers or the rest of the employees, so that they can either do the proper self-service or the proper request, or hop into a knowledge base and really pull up the information they need. For example, if you're in a company of 100 people and there's a very specific process about requesting time off, well, if there's a knowledge base and you're able to look that up or pull up the how-to on that, that's something that people want to do themselves. They're not going to wait or send the HR director an email, right? They'd rather do it themselves.
If I take a look at it, like if an organization is, let's say they're only doing incident management, but they take a look at it and say, hey, listen, we want to start doing problem, we want to start doing change, we want to automate a lot of things that we do, whether it's password resets or whatever the case may be. We want to start delivering better services. How quickly can you guys turn on your Grand Central instant for an organization, and how different is that to, for instance, if somebody wanted their own instance of ServiceNow?
Well, I could say we probably would do it next day if you want us to, but we would obviously have more of a collaborative approach, and obviously people are probably using ITSM tools now, so there's a lot of, you have to take some asset information and pull it in, you have to take any legacy information and pull it back in. So that usually takes a week or two, so I'm not going to kind of blow smoke here. I would say within a week or two, we can literally give you a full-blown instance of ServiceNow, and if you want automated password resets, or if you wanted a particular integration into another tool that you have internally that maybe does your business, it's one of those things that all of that can be developed very, very quickly.
Okay, perfect. And so when you take a look at it, like as I mentioned before earlier on the call, there is kind of like a solution set for any type of customer. So there's different ITSMs tools that we provide to clients based on how big they are, from 100 employees above 2,500. There's also the managed services component that we can go in and work with organizations. There's the service desk. And then as we get into the questions, and I'll touch base on this right now, there was a question in terms of, somebody had their own instance of ServiceNow, and they lag behind on releases, and then also there's some customization that they like to do. And what does CareWorks bring to the table with their RSA program?
Right. So it's one of those things. Is when I was talking about how we built out our instance, we're able to upgrade at any time. That's how we built it, based on that kind of ITIL ServiceNow best practice. The person who built our instance has over 17 years as a ServiceNow administrator. So this gentleman knows exactly how and what gets affected by certain updates, and is able to build out things the way they're supposed to be built out. But most importantly, when we're looking at the ITIL that is pulled in there, we're able to do things in an efficient manner. So that's the why. That's the whys of why we've built kind of Grand Central the way we have.
Okay. I'm just going through the questions here, so if anybody has any questions, you can always send us an email at sales@careworks.com, or you can even just put it into the chat session. One of the questions came in here is how do you provide customization to ITSM? So I'm thinking whether that's the full-fledged instance of ServiceNow or your Grand Central offering.
Yeah, and that's where that RSA comes in, that remote sysadmin. So one of the offerings that we have as well is that whether you choose our Grand Central or whether or not you have something like ServiceNow right now, is that we're able to get in there and programmatically make those changes for you, right? Typically, that's a very expensive venture for any enterprise even to do, right? So we're able to do that not only efficiently, but at a much lower cost.
Okay. There was a question, and maybe I'll just kind of rephrase it. So ServiceNow has a minimum license count. I think it's you got to start off with 20 licenses on the full-fledged ServiceNow platform. On the Grand Central platform, somebody was asking a question: what are the minimums that, like, in terms of license count? And so you can actually start with 4 or 5 licenses if you need to on our own Grand Central platform. And I'll also stress as well is that we kind of view Grand Central as the full-fledged ITSM platform of ServiceNow, but could also be an incubator for an organization that really wants to get their feet wet with ServiceNow, that wants to kind of try it out, but doesn't want to make the massive capital investment into ServiceNow. We have the ability to sell them what other platform they want. So from our standpoint, it's fine. But Grand Central allows you to go in and if you have 5 or 6 techs that really want to play around with the solution and utilize it, you can actually buy 5 or 6 licenses from us because it is based on as a service model. We have a pool of licenses that we can just kind of give to people. So that's kind of the major difference between both solutions. And to your point, if you're going to put a project plan in place to deploy ServiceNow, they call it a quick start program. Sometimes you can get it up and running in 4 months. With Grand Central, as you mentioned, we can turn a customer on within a week or 2 weeks, and they have ServiceNow. So right. There's definitely some different types of flexibilities that organizations can use. Another question that just came through was, do we offer trials of Grand Central? And yes, we do. So if you want to play around with the solution for a few weeks, and utilize it internally and deploy it and all that kind of stuff, you can definitely use Grand Central. The last question that came through was just has to do with our licensing model. So the difference between our licensing model in Grand Central and our licensing model in ServiceNow is, in ServiceNow we have to charge the customer a year up front for the licensing. Within Grand Central, it's a true SaaS-based offering, so you just basically pay month over month, month by month for your licensing, so there's no upfront cost. You're just paying the licensing on a monthly subscription basis, and real kind of very simple in terms of turning it on.
Right, and that's a really good try before you buy kind of
Yep.
methodology, right? So if you at that 1 year mark and you're like, well, maybe this isn't for me, or maybe I need to I've outgrown Grand Central and I want to start incorporating all that other tool suite that comes along with ServiceNow, that's definitely doable as well.
Yeah, so I guess we call that uncoupling. So we can actually start somebody off on Grand Central, and if in a year, or as you mentioned, 2 years or a year and a half later, they want to have their own instance of ServiceNow, then we can actually uncouple them and switch them over to that platform.
That's right.
And get them over. So there's some really kind of unique ways that people can actually start playing around with the solution. And I think what's really nice about it is this is, I mentioned it before, kind of like a game changer in the marketplace, where we're taking ServiceNow and bringing it to smaller organizations and companies in the marketplace that are really kind of interested in it.
Right.
Before we kind of part, I just want to say thank you to everybody. We had a great number of people that attended this webinar. This is part 1 of 3. So I recommend, if you haven't registered for it, please do so. Part 2 is going to be basically moving beyond ticketing and embracing change for better. So Jason and our ITSM sales manager, Derek Poitras, is going to be handling that. And I look forward to watching that one, because that one's probably going to be really interesting because we have a lot of people that just do ticketing and trying to evolve their business. So it's going to be interesting, and maybe we can even show them a little bit of the UI or something like that in terms of what we do with that. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Listen, thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk with you on August 17th. Thank you very much.